What's up, y'all? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Today, Randy and I are going to be talking about the best areas to fish during the fall time of the year on clear water lakes. We're talking like 3+ foot of visibility, and we're going to be going through the best shallow water areas, where Randy will be, and I'll be going through the best deep water areas. We'll be pulling up Navionics mapping, talking about strategy to fish these areas and everything. So, should be a really great live stream. I'm excited to see everyone on. We got Renzo, Ray, Timo, Dan, Ron, James, Tyler, Jim. How's everyone doing? And Randy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good, Johnny. This ought to be a really good podcast tonight because, the fall time of the year, to me, it's all about diversity and there's a lot of options. I mean, because you're talking between like the September, November area time frame, big transition period, a lot of migrations going on, and there's just a lot of different stuff going on the lakes out there.
For sure. I think that that's one of the challenges this time of year is that you have to be able to adapt to the situations. I think that if you want to be a successful fall angler, it's actually really nice to be able to have some offshore and shallow water patterns in the same day, because on any given day, those shallow fish just might not be biting as well as the offshore fish and vice versa, given the weather conditions, cold fronts, all kinds of stuff.
Right, definitely so. And that's the thing when you're dealing with clear water lakes, the weather patterns on clear water lakes have a lot more of an impact than they do on other type of fisheries. When you're dealing with any place that has water visibility of over 3 feet and you've got falling water temperatures and shorter days, man, to me, the sky conditions, the wind conditions, it plays such a huge factor in how you need to be fishing.
For sure. And you've been just coming back from a couple Bassmaster Opens, fishing in that fall transition where you're kind of in that time between the summer and the fall. And maybe we can touch a
Yeah.
little bit on that as well during the stream, is how do you locate fish up shallower in the fall transition and then also into the fall? I know we're kind of getting out of that fall transition time now in most of the country, but maybe just kind of preface there, and then we can talk about fall. And really, how would you define fall fishing, Randy? What months or like water temperatures would you use there?
Well, to me, the fall transition initially it starts out really slow because you've got like in late August and even into up into mid-September, a lot of times you still have pretty hot water and even 95 degree days in mid-September, or even like here in Missouri. So that transition initially takes place real slow. But what happens is usually towards the end of September, like we are right now, that's when you start to get that first major cold front that comes in
Mm,
that really drops the temperature quicker and lower than it's been like maybe since early May or late April. It's like we had it here in Missouri this past week. It'd been in the 80s and 90s forever, and then finally we got down to the 40s one night. And when you have that first cold snap, that first uh, bite of fall in the air, to me, that's when you really start missing a change in like the techniques that are required on Clearwater lakes. It just seems like to me there's something about that moves those fish, that positions them different when they have been. There's still a lot of fish out there that are suspended, in that clear water, but you have a movement to the bank, especially a movement of a little bit more quality fish than were in the past. And to me, that stays that transition sort of uh, it stays into that zone until that water temperature starts to get down into the low 50s, and then you start to get into the early winter patterns.
for sure. I would completely agree with that. And I think a lot of guys think that fall fishing ends sooner than it does. I find that I still have like kind of a late fall bite into late December. Sometimes in the first couple weeks of January, if you're in these warmer climates or if you have a warm winter, and you can get fish on like top water baits, buzz baits, stuff like that in December, even when that water temperature is 52, 53 degrees.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of guys miss on these, especially on these clear water lakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And like last winter, that was the warmest winter I can ever remember my entire life. We had water temperatures at Table Rock Lake and at Grand that they were in the low 50s even in December, and
Yep.
in the upper 40s in January, which is it's about 8 to 10 degrees warmer than it normally is. So the seasonal weather patterns, they that determines a lot of, what's going on at that specific time. Just weather patterns, cold fronts, water levels. There's a lot of variables that go into it, but there's always that change. It doesn't matter what type of weather comes through. There's always a predictable change. And I personally think that fall, you see the most radical transition in techniques and areas and fish movement in the fall time of the year than any other time of the year, in my opinion, especially on Clearwater lakes.
For sure. Well, Randy, let's jump straight into it and start taking a look at some spots. If you want to start sharing your screen there, pulling up Navionics. Really,
Sure.
again, we're talking about is Clearwater lakes, and for this example, we're going to be using Table Rock Lake. It's a lake that Randy and I both fish, we're both very familiar with. In the future here, we're actually going to be taking suggestions from our Patreon members on which lakes we're going to be breaking down, and I'll be posting, for all my Patreon members, I'll be posting a link where you can actually recommend lakes, and we'll be using those as examples. We just thought for this time we use Table Rock because we're both very familiar, and it's a nice Clearwater lake. But yeah, if you could present your screen there, Randy, just hit the present now on the Google Hangout, and then you can share your screen there. There we go, and then just pull over that Navionics map.
Okay. You got it?
Yeah, we got it. We got us. So perfect. So yeah, maybe just start out with that kind of fall transition period a little bit, that like September time. Where would you be looking on these Clearwater lakes up shallow to find those fish?
Here's sort of my approach to that, Johnny. When you're talking about September and you first start noticing that temperature, it starts to go in the decline instead of the rise. And we're talking about water temperatures when they first start getting down closer to that 80-degree mark, because in the mid part of the country, a lot of lakes are in the southeast. You have water temperatures in the mid to upper 80s all summer long, and then in September you start having a slow cool down, into that lower 80s or around 80. So, for example, in my mind, I consider the fall fishing to start like September 1st. And my approach in a Clearwater lake, and it doesn't matter if I'm like on Table Rock Lake, or I can be like at Lake Hartwell where I just came from, or I could be on Lake Lanier, wherever it is. The first part of September is some of the toughest fishing that you can have on a Clearwater lake. And the areas that I go to on a Clearwater lake in September are always the upper extremities. Now, for example, let's go to Long Creek here. This is a creek down on the lower end of the lake. And let me scroll out a little bit. You can sort of see right here. Here's here would be the mouth of Long Creek. And let me scroll in here. And once you start getting to the back of this particular creek, you can notice you got the creek takes on an element of, like, you have a channel bank right here. Then you have an adjacent flat across the channel, and that sort of goes on all the way back through there like that, where you have like this channel bank and you've got a flatter bank.
Yep.
This is the area right here that I key in on in the early part of September. And what I'm looking for is, I like to fish the flatter sides of the back of these creek arms like this, and I'll target, like in particular here, any isolated wood cover, lay down stumps, log jams, whatever like that. And I'll work my way back as far as I can get back into these creeks, targeting like the isolated wood in the middle of the flat side here when the water's still hot. And a lot of times I'm fishing moving baits this time of year, burning a square bill crankbait, maybe fishing a top water like a buzzbait fast over it, spinnerbait, chatterbait, something like that, in these very back ends of these creeks here. Now, if I'm getting a few bites, like on these flats over here like this, I may move over to the channel side here, and I'll do some parallel cranking to the rocks, like on the channel side, because a lot of times, depending upon the day or just the mood of the fish in that particular creek, they'll get on the channel sides too, on the rock, versus the laydowns on the flats here. But what I'm looking for, this is my first stop on any type of Clearwater lake. And let me go to a different spot, and I'll show you another example of this too. Let's go, say for example, We'll go up in the White River arm here, and I'll just show you another example of this here. This would be Indian Creek near the Baxter area, which is not the Indian Creek down the lake here. But see, you've got a similar situation back here. Some of these creeks in the Clearwater areas are going to be dirtier than others. They all have a similar factor to them. They've all got a channel bank, like the last channel bank in the back of these creeks, and then you have an adjacent flat across there. And normally, this area where you have the last channel bank is a key section. This is a key fall migration area for the bass. And you work all the way back into the flat, like I said, targeting the offshore laydowns, offshore log jams, targeting the channel banks, last channel banks leading into it, and any isolated cover on the flats. And you can run this particular pattern all over the lake. It's sort of like it's a real good fall pattern anywhere you go, and you can also do it on the upper river extremities. Say, for example, if we go up Kings River here, you got the same situation in Kings. You got your flats, and you got your channel banks and your adjacent flats, and a river arm will turn into more of a riverine type area, and this is a mix of rocky banks, laydowns, gravel banks, mud flats, that type of stuff. But basically, to sort of summarize that, early September up till mid-September, I'm in the upper creek portions, upper river portions.
Awesome. And then in terms of the actual transition, then when you get that first cold front, let's say end of September, like right now, 1st of October, we basically had our first big couple cold fronts of the year. How does your strategy start changing then when you see those water temperatures starting to drop from the 80s into the maybe mid 70s to low 70s?
Well, to me, this particular area that I just laid out here, I mean, this is something that can remain productive up until November. But what happens is when that water temperature starts to consistently cool down, and we start to get water temperatures that are getting into the 60s, it's not that these upper areas like this become not as good. They're still good. But what happens is when that water temperature starts to get down into the 60s and even in the upper 50s on these Clearwater Lake, it opens up a lot of other options around the lake. And for example, as we get into October, like right now, and that water temperature is starting to cool down into the 70s, the thing that I'm looking for is I like to move more to the main lake on the lower end of the lake in the clearest water of the lake. And this is the time of year that I really, really like fishing main lake bluffs on the lower end of the lake in the cleanest part of the water, in the cleanest water that I can find. And for example, here's Indian Creek at Table Rock. You got this very steep, bluffy, almost vertical main lake channel bank, which there's a lot of this type of water on any type of clear water natural impoundments. It doesn't matter if you're on Lake Cumberland, Lake Cherokee, whatever. There's a lot of this type of structure on these Clearwater lakes. So the thing that I like to do is once you start getting into October and you have that first cold snap, I like to parallel these main lake bluffs like right here. And, I'll concentrate a lot of times on the bluff ends, but not necessarily. But what I'm doing is I'm looking for an early morning and a late in the evening bite. Anytime I can find these vertical banks like this that have some shade on them, I get my boat tied against the bank right here, and I parallel that bank, making long casts, and I'm trying to target those fish that are in that 3 to 10 foot zone, that are basically coming up out of that deeper water. Now in Table Rock here, you'll have submerged timber out off the channel banks here. And once that water temperature starts to get down in the 60s, a lot of those fish will start using the bank on these main lake bluff banks, and they're very situational. That's when I was talking about Clearwater lakes being susceptible to different weather patterns and cloud conditions. This is one of the areas I'm talking about. For example, like right now, if we had a day on Table Rock Lake, say tomorrow we went out and it was supposed to be cloudy, maybe misty rain with a 15-mile-an-hour wind, I can promise you that we would absolutely wreck them on these main lake bluffs on top waters, crankbaits, spinner baits, swim baits, that type of stuff. Any type of moving bait that you could parallel along here. And this is another pattern you can run. You can run this all throughout the lake. Anywhere that you have the channel swinging tight against the bank, like right here. Another particular area right here. You can do. It's a great pattern for the fall time of the year. Holds up well into November, and that's one of the things that I start looking for about now.
Awesome. And really quick, just a clarification. Thor Goldsmith on the stream asked, what do you mean when you say the upper or lower end of a lake? Is this the same as the north and the south? And I'll take that question. I got actually Google Earth pulled up here, Randy. And really, when we talk about upper and lower end of the lake, a lot of times upper and lower end can be a little bit deceiving because it's not necessarily always north and south. What we mean by that is a water clarity change. So for example, if you look on the main part of Table Rock Lake, you'll notice on Google Earth that this water has this darker blue color to it. But then as you go into these creek arms, into these shallower creeks like Long Creek that Randy was talking about, you notice that a lot of the water clarity turns to be this brighter green. That means you're going to have less water visibility. You might have a foot of water visibility up in the back of this creek, which would be the upper end of the lake, quote unquote, versus up here on the main lake where you have this darker blue water. That might be 6 to 10 foot of water visibility in certain years. And when Randy's saying to go into the upper end of the lake, what he's talking about is going to areas where you have that dirtier water, that 1 to 3 foot of water visibility in that September time, as opposed to fishing on the main lake, or you could call this the lower end of the lake, even though directionally it's not lower or higher. It's really just like clear water versus dirty water. And then as you get into that October time, you can move away from the dirty water and you can fish in the clearer water because the bite improves. The bite on this clear water section is not great up shallow in September, but it gets better in October. Does that summarize it pretty well, Randy?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect right on.
Cool. Sorry to interrupt you there, Randy. So next up, let's talk about what you do then as you start transitioning into that October to November time. Water temperatures now are dropping hard. You're getting into the 60-degree water temperatures, maybe even in like the high 50s range.
Yeah, that's here again. Like I said, the things that I'm describing here, like the bluff banks, backs of the backs of the creeks and the river section. It's not like any of these things that I'm going to tell you about just quit working. They're going to work all throughout the fall. But what happens as that water temperature drops and as it drops down, and I'm going to say that in this part of the country that once that water temperature starts getting down into the low to mid 50s, that's sort of like the end of the fall. So you're starting to get more into the early winter there. But once that water temperature starts to get down the low 60s, or in the upper 50s. And in this part of the country and a lot of different parts of the country, that's usually going to be in late October, first part of November, that type of stuff. That's when one of the things I like to do is I move across from the bluffs. Okay, here's, like I said, you got the channel swing bluffs over here. That's when I really like to go across the lake on the lower end of the lake in the clear water and fish these flat, rounded points and banks, not necessarily just on the points, but the flat, rounded, gravelly type areas. And this is, like I said, here's a good example right here, what we're talking about. Like I said, every man-made impoundment is laid out the same way on this. You have a channel side, and then adjacent to that, you have a flat side. In this particular area on Table Rock, see these little rounded, these long points that come out here like this. There's lots of subtle main lake points. These are all small rock gravel points that have just a gradual steady drop down into 30 or 40 feet. And what happens is these are outstanding topwater areas, like in late November, late October, early part of November, areas that you can run up onto, throw a walk in topwater, throw a fast burning the spinnerbait. Like I said, if you guys have seen my blog article on Fish the Moment on the speedy spinnerbaits, that technique basically was developed. You can run these like gravelly flat points in late October, November, burning those little spinner baits I was talking about in my blog article, or topwater, and you can just smoke them on the right days. And here again, what we're looking for is windy days, cloudy days, early in the morning, late in the evening. And let's duplicate this again. Like I said, you can run it everywhere. I'll just pick out an area here and go back and show you the same thing. Again, any of these areas like this that you got these rounded main lake points, you can see this, 29, 30 foot, this is probably 100 yards offshore. So any of these flatter rounded points like that catch a lot of wind. And what happens is a lot of those fish that are hanging out here off the end of these main lake points, there may be groups of fish out here that are suspended out over 40 or 50 feet of water. And when they get the right conditions, when they get the wind and the clouds and the nasty weather, they pull up into the shallow water and, feed on these flatter banks. And like I said, this is something that's going to last, up until that water temperature starts to get down in the mid 50s. But I can tell you right now, when that water temperature first hits that 60-degree mark and gets into that upper 50s, I've got the walking top waters and I've got the small spinner baits on, and I'm covering water on those flat banks on the main lake. You can catch them in the creek sometimes, but this is the time of the year I really want to focus on the main lake, and I want to focus on mid to lower end of the lake. You can, once you get up past about mid lake, in most lakes you start losing your water clarity. So again, I'm focusing on this lower end, like right here. This is like the area that I'm looking for.
That's awesome. And one question we're having here, Randy, I'm typing. If you see me looking down, guys, I'm typing responses to people in the chat. But one question we had from, let's see who it was, but it was from Gary Maynard. He said, "So you guys aren't chasing shad up in the creeks? Is that something that you would be doing, Randy? Would you be chasing the shad up in the creeks?" And you can actually stop presenting now, Randy, too. Oh, there you go. Yeah, go back to the Navionics. Keep there. Would you be chasing fish back in the creeks? This time of year, it seems like a lot of your areas are on that more main lake stuff.
Well, it's, shad is always a bonus, anytime. And a lot of times, like I said, you find them in the backs of the creeks and the coves this time of year. But, another factor you got to consider, it depends on the bait fish that's in the lake you're fishing. Table Rock, for example, has just a phenomenal crawdad population. I mean, that's like, it's one of the top crawfish lakes in the country. So, you got different type of forage. It's not necessarily all the time shad based. And a lot of these fish that I'm talking about on the main lake, they're not necessarily focused on the shad. They can be focused on the perch. I mean, there's still, when that water temperature is in the 60s still, there's still a lot of bluegills up. There's still a lot of black perch, a lot of sunfish. And I think a lot of those bass feed pretty heavily on perch in the fall time as well. I mean, it's a bigger meal for them, and being side oriented like that, it's a little bit easier for them to catch them than they are in the off-colored water lakes.
Perfect. And then in terms of the last time of that fall period, you kind of have that point where the water temperatures between about 52 degrees and 60 degrees. That's kind of what I would consider like the late fall, right before it turns into that winter time. Now, there's not this pattern might not exist like down south in Texas or in Florida, southern Louisiana. You might never have water temperatures drop below 55 degrees. But in a lot of lakes, in that kind of central part of the Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, northern Alabama, you'll have that water temperature dip in the high 40s in the winter. So when that water temperature starts getting in that like 52 to 60 degree range, where are you looking then, Randy?
Well, yeah, towards the end of the fall like that, one of the things I really like to do once that water's really getting down there, like I said, everything I talked about before is still going to be working. I mean, it's going to be working up until that water temperature gets down in the low 40s, upper 40s, low 50s. But another thing I like to do later, like you're talking about, is I'll move into these major creek arms on the lower end of the lake. And that's when I'm really focused on these secondary points. Now here's got Indian Creek right here, lower. I'll sort of scroll out to show you the position. Here's the dam at Table Rock right here. Indian Point, you got some smaller creeks here. I'll move back into these creek arms, and I'll start running these secondary points in the creeks. And almost every man-made reservoir in the bigger creeks, you have a lot of these rounded secondary points. Some of them are more defined than others. But one of the things I like to do in that scenario, this is when I like fishing. This is a prime time of year to fish like a glide bait. When you go, when you have that water temperature starting to go down like that, and right before it gets too cold for moving baits, I'll go in and fish a glide bait around some of these secondary points. Also, I'll be fishing, the top waters again. But, there's just a lot of little subtle secondary points. They don't have to be pronounced. Like this one right here, this is like, it's almost just like a bank leading into a cove, but it's still some type of a subtle point. And I'll go into these creek arms and I'll just run all this type of stuff like this. Come in here and hit this one, come in here and hit this one, hit that one right there. I'll run and gun as many of these little rounded points as I can in these creeks on the lower end of the lake. And like I said, they're a real good staging area. A lot of these fish that suspend out in the mouth of these coves, in the guts like here, lakes like Table Rock, lakes like Lake Lanier, a lot of these fish will suspend out in those guts, that basically the ones you're fishing for, Jonny, the deeper fish.
Yep.
A lot of those fish will start moving up to those secondary points in these major creek arms, and just use the point ends and 100 yards either side of them.
That's perfect. Awesome. Well, that kind of covers all of the different transitions in the fall and all the different shallow water areas here on these Clearwater lakes. I think that's a really good deal there. If you want to stop sharing your screen, Randy, just stop presenting, going over to that. Yeah, just you stop presenting. I'm going to start talking about some offshore areas now, and I'll get your opinion on those as well. But one thing that we're getting a bunch of questions on, guys, they're saying, like, no square bills in the creek arms and coves. It seems like that's the thing the guys like to do, is they like to just run the backs of creeks and throw a square bill, a spinner bait. Yeah. That's something a lot of guys just do in the fall. And, I mean, that's an effective way to catch them, but not necessarily the best way to go catch big ones all the time. It's kind of hit or miss a lot of times, I feel like.
Yeah, and, here's the thing about the square bill, shallow water type deal. That pattern and that technique gets absolutely hammered on and pounded by anglers anymore. That's a super well-known technique. It's super popular. And to me, there's like a small window of time to when that is really, really productive. I mean, you can always catch a few fish doing that, but you got to have the timing perfect. You got to have the right day. You got to have a situation where the area that you're fishing is not getting a lot of fishing pressure. Because when you're talking about fishing those upper extremities, like I labeled there, they can't handle a lot of fishing pressure. You're talking about small areas, obvious targets. People run the same stuff over and over again. So that, even though I love fishing like that, that's a technique that I sort of try to stay away from in the fall if I can, because I simply know it gets really exploited a lot.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Then Scott Colbreth asks here, he says, I got a big tournament on Saturday on a clear lake that's deep for the most part, is 50 to 200 feet deep, lots of rock, bluffs, and ledges, but not many shallow water fish. Any thoughts? Well, that's exactly what Table Rock is. That's almost a perfect description of Table Rock Lake, and I'll be talking about offshore areas here in a bit. What Randy talked about here, though, it will work on that same lake. The things that Randy just laid out, the lake you're describing there, Scott, is basically Table Rock. I don't know what lake it is, but that sets up identical to Table Rock. There's a lot, 200 feet of water, deep, rock ledges, bluffs. That's what we're talking about in this type of lake. But we have a bunch of other questions coming in. Before we do that, I'm going to take a quick break here, Randy, to just mention a few things about some stuff we have going on fishthemoment.com. We always like to do a little bit of a plug here. Let me get this pulled up really quick. What's going on here? Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay, got this pulled up. fishthemoment.com. So on this, what I wanted to just quickly bring up is... 1 second here. Sorry about that. Let me get this. There we go. fishthemoment.com. Got a couple things to tell you guys about. First are some virtual seminars that we're going to be doing. We actually had an advanced jerkbait fishing seminar, the when, where, and how of jerkbait fishing, that has completely filled up, and Randy is just apparently like the go-to jerkbait guy because his class filled up in like less than a week. So we're going to be doing another one of these, and you guys are loving it. So we're going to be doing another one of these seminars, talking more about baits and things like that. And Randy, you actually helped design the Megabass Vision 110, isn't that right?
Yeah, I did. Back in the late 1990s with Megabass, that's when we, really started working on that. And I had a dozen of my handmade, custom painted, just tricked out rogues and stuff like that, and sent them all to Japan. We went back and forth on it, and that's how the Vision 110 actually came about. Through a lot of the stuff I learned from the Ozarks here fishing it.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing another one of those seminars here in the future, probably sometime in November. And then also later in October, I'm going to be doing an advanced offshore bass fishing seminar, when, where, and how to fish offshore fish, focused more for like those tournament guys who want to become more efficient and effective offshore fishermen. I'm talking about offshore fishing timing and feeding windows, how to develop an offshore fishing strategy, how to make sure you can rotate spots properly so you hit them at the right time, what conditions dictate when you should be on a spot and when not to be there, as well as how to find some of the more hidden, subtle areas that maybe other guys in your tournaments aren't going to be looking for. So that's going to be a really great class. Definitely sign up for that. It already is half full, and it's not until October 22nd, so definitely go sign up for that if you want to improve your offshore fishing game. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about in the seminar, I've never talked about on my YouTube channel. It's going to be very exclusive content that's new just for the seminar. And then I'm also going to be doing another advanced bass fishing electronics class November 12th. This is also already half full, and it's not until November. These are super popular. They always fill up. And it's basically, I'm going to be talking about how to interpret your fish finder to determine if you're looking at bass, if those bass are catchable, whether you should stop and fish there or not, what baits to fish based on what you see on your fish finder, and basically everything you know that's going to take your bass fishing electronics game to the next level. This content is not going to be repetitive of what I have in my YouTube videos already. It's all, again, unique content to this, never before talked about on my YouTube channel. So that is that. And then we also obviously have our lake breakdowns that I'm sure many of you have heard about. And we actually give spot recommendations on a lot of lakes across the country in every season of the year. So spring, summer, fall, and winter. And we have a lot of the most popular lakes around the country. We give 60 different spots across 4 different areas of a lake. And basically we're doing what we're doing in these breakdown in this seminar right now, but we're actually putting dots on the map, showing you what these areas are all about, giving you location descriptions, conditions, lure recommendations, all kinds of stuff. And Randy makes all these, puts a lot of effort into them. And we have the list of lakes here that we're going to be doing this fall. And if it's not on there, you can always book a personal map breakdown as well, where you can actually get a personalized map of a lake. Maybe it's smaller and not as popular. So that is all for that. Got a bunch of other stuff going. Also, if you guys do want to sign up for an on-the-water lesson with Randy and have him actually take you out fishing this fall or in the winter, you can sign up for an on-the-water lesson with Randy here, and you can just contact him through the website. So enough of all that, but let's jump back over here. And I'm actually going to start looking at some offshore areas. But any other things on that, Randy, from the website before we jump into that?
Yeah, I just encourage everybody to check out those lake map breakdowns because, Johnny and I, we put a lot of time into this. I mean, this is something that's it's like unlike anything you've ever seen before on the detail of a lake breakdown. It's just like I said, it's a description of the areas. We identify the seasonal patterns and movements of the bass and make tips and advice, recommendations on each one of those areas. A lot of effort goes into the creation of those maps. So I think that, if you want to learn about the lake that you're fishing, or if you got a new one that you're getting ready to go to, it would really save you a lot of time checking these maps out.
For sure. And there's a question from Doug asks, what's the lead time on these maps? We try to get them to you in 5 to 7 business days. Obviously, Randy is fishing the Bassmaster Opens as well, so sometimes when he's fishing Opens and stuff, the time frame can get a little bit wonky, but I always keep you guys informed if there is going to be a delay. And if you give us a deadline, if you have like a tournament or something coming up, we can make sure we accommodate that, so no worries on that. Anyway, so let me start sharing my screen so you can see what I'm talking about here, Randy, and then I'm going to pull up Navionics and you guys can see what I'm looking at. So let me know if you can see my screen there, Randy.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up Navionics. You won't be able to see us anymore because that's just the way the technology works. We still need to work through the kinks. But I'm going to go through some of these offshore areas. And obviously, Randy knows everything about the shallow water games. You've seen that from the videos. And I'm more focused on the offshore fishing. And when I try to fish offshore in the fall, it's that transition away from the summertime. And the summertime is the best time of year to fish offshore in general. Most of the fish on these deeper, clear lakes are going to pull into the offshore areas out in the middle of the lake relating to creek channels and deeper water. However, as you get into that fall time of the year, the offshore bite gets tougher and tougher and tougher until the point where it's almost harder to catch a fish offshore in like October and November than any other time of the year. However, there are ways you can catch fish offshore in the fall, and I still do it all fall because it's a very uncommon way to catch them. And like we talked about earlier, everyone's in the backs of creeks throwing a crankbait, and I'm fishing offshore. So starting out in that September time, when you still have 80-degree water temperatures, maybe the fall transition is just starting to happen, my favorite thing to do is I like to run into the major creek arms on these clear water lakes, and I'm going to focus on trying to find a certain water visibility. And really my goal is I want to find a water visibility that's somewhere between 2 to 5 feet of visibility. I don't want to be looking for water visibility that's too clean. You don't want to be in that 8 to 12 foot of visibility or like that, maybe even that 5 to 10 foot of visibility range. You want to be in that 2 to 5 foot of visibility range up some of these major creek arms. What happens is that as you get in that dirtier water, those fish are going to be a little bit shallower and they're going to be relating to cover a lot more. And that's going to make them a lot easier to catch, especially offshore. As you get to the clearer water, those fish have a tendency to suspend, chase bait fish, and run around in open water, which makes them very, very difficult to catch. So what I'll basically do is I'm going to be going to a creek arm with 2 to 5 foot of visibility, and I'm going to be looking specifically for areas where you have the sharpest drop-off that you can possibly find. So if we transition back over here and we go up into, for example, the James River area on Table Rock, I'm going to be going to these 2 to 5 foot of visibility areas, and I'm going to be looking for areas where I have the steepest drop-off I can find, from, let's say, 20 foot of water to 100 feet of water. Or over here where you have 10 foot of water dropping into 90 feet of water. The sharper the drop-off, the better. I find that the majority of your big fish in the offshore areas during this time of year are going to be where you have the sharpest drop-offs. Now, these fish are not going to be super easy to catch, but they will be really good quality fish. Another thing to remember with this time of year in September is that you're not going to have groups of fish on every single offshore area through here. Unlike in June when basically fish are just pulling offshore, you might have a fish on every single point and hump and ledge in this entire area. But in the September time of the year, as you get into that September and like really the end of September, the number of offshore schools is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. You might only have maybe 5 offshore schools of fish from the mouth of the James River all the way up to the end up here. 5 schools. What this means is that those schools of fish are going to be very grouped up on one spot, and they're also going to be very tough to catch because they're going to be getting beat up by a lot of fishermen. As a result, you have to also move to try to find some fish that aren't in those bigger schools. And that's really a big difference between the fall and the summer. In the summer, I like fishing big schools of fish. In the fall, I like to fish isolated, kind of small pods of fish, 3 to 5 fish schools. And where I'm going to look for those fish are usually around some sort of isolated rock or isolated brush. Brush piles specifically on these clear water lakes are really, really good. Man-made brush piles are planted out in the middle of the lake. And what I'm looking for are places where you have deep water, close to shallow water, and where someone's planted a man-made brush pile. Now, you don't necessarily need to find that brush pile right on the break, like right where that drop-off is. A lot of times it can be a brush pile that's off around the curve of a point or up on top of a bigger flat. So, for example, like on a point like this, you might find that your brush pile is like somewhere over here off this point, but it's relatively close to this deeper water. And what you'll find is that there's going to be maybe 3 to 5 fish sitting in that brush pile, And the fish that are in there are going to be big ones, 3 to 5 pounders. And what I'm looking for is I'm going to try to find 10 to 20 of these brush piles that I identify have 3 to 5 fish in them, close to these deep channel swings, up in like maybe that 10 to 25 to 30 foot of water range. And I'm going to throw baits like a football jig, that Neko rig, deep diving crankbait like a 10XD, 6XD, a big swim bait. You can throw a drop shot in there as well. And when I'm doing this in September, I might only get 3 to 5 bites a day. And I'm going to have, let's say, 15 brush piles marked across this lake that are in that 20 to 30 foot of water range, close to a drop off or a channel. And you just have them kind of in different areas around the lake. And what I'll find is that of those brush piles that I find off of these deeper points by these drop-offs, I might only get bit out of 2 or 3 of those 10 or 15 brush piles throughout the day. And I might even rotate those brush piles 3 to 4 times. And as a result, you're only going to be getting 5 to 6 bites max offshore this time of year. But if you can get 5 of them in the boat, you're usually looking at a 15 to 20 pound bag of fish for your 5 best fish. Now, I've done this on a lot of lakes with this clear water all across the country. It's a really good way to catch them, and it's definitely my go-to approach offshore. Now, another way you can catch them is you can catch them down here on the clear water end of the lake, especially if you have the blueback herring, like on Lake Hartwell where Randy was just fishing the Bassmaster Open. The issue with fishing down the clearer end is that those fish are going to roam a lot more. They're not going to be isolated and sitting around a brush pile. That means that if you come down to the clear end of the lake, you find a brush pile off a point or something like this over here, those fish are going to be randomly roaming and chasing the herring and chasing the shad in open water and schooling. And those fish are a lot tougher to catch because you have to basically just get lucky and get your bait in front of them as they come up busting or as they're swimming around chasing the shad. Where when you get into that dirtier water up the creeks and the river arms, those fish are going to be locked into that brush and around that brush, not roaming as much, and it makes them easier to actually target with a jig or a crankbait. Does that all sound about right to you, Randy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an example of how there's so much going on in a lake at the same time. I mean, people can get locked in on certain things going on, but man, in the clear water lakes like this, there's such a diversity of techniques happening that it can be overwhelming at times. Like I said, it's really good to have a breakdown. I learn a lot just from listening to you myself. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm like one of the students listening to you with this. So yeah, but it makes a lot of sense with that.
Perfect. And Badger Pennington, he asks, what's the difference between chasing schooling fish and isolated fish? What I find is that with the schooling fish, you might have a point like this right here where you might have fish that are basically, I'm making a video about this very soon, Badger, so you can check that out on the channel here in like the next week or so. But what happens is that a lot of the smaller bass will group up in schools of 10 to 15 to 20 bass. And they'll chase threadfin shad and gizzard shad and stuff around these points. And you can catch them on top waters and flukes and stuff like that. But a lot of times on these clear water lakes, those schooling fish are going to be small fish, 1 to 2 pounders. The bigger fish, though, are going to be hanging around those brush piles. And you're going to have to fish them with like a jig or a crankbait and get around that cover. And you're going to be able to catch 10 schooling fish to every 1 isolated fish in a brush pile, but also the 1 fish you catch out of the brush pile is going to be a 3 to 5 pounder versus the 1 to 2 pounders they're schooling. The only exception to that is on the blueback herring lakes. If you're in South Carolina, North Carolina, stuff like that, those fish that are schooling off these points, you can catch a 5-pound largemouth just as easily as a 2-pound largemouth on those schooling fish because those big bass just love those blueback herring and they're going to chase them no matter what. So that's a little bit of a difference in the forage. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. And that's kind of the big deal with the difference between fishing offshore and shallow in the fall. What I find is when I'm fishing up shallow in the fall, my primary forage focus is going to be on brim or bluegill or perch, some sort of panfish, or crawfish. Would you agree with that, Randy? That's kind of what you're focused on?
Definitely on a clear water lake. I mean, there's such a huge difference. Like if you're fishing at Grand Lake versus Table Rock Lake, or if you were fishing like at Lake Eufaula in Alabama versus Lake Martin in Alabama, those clear water fish are just really, really keyed in on the perch and the crawfish more than the shad.
Up shallow. up
Up
shallow.
shallow. It has a lot to do with water visibility.
Yep. So that clear water lake, if you're fishing up shallow, you want to be focused on crawfish and bluegill. Now, when you're fishing offshore, though, I focus almost exclusively on shad when I'm fishing offshore on a clear water lake. And that's because the shad will stay deeper in the middle of the creeks, in the middle of the pockets and stuff in the fall on clear water lakes. And you can basically, if you're going to catch fish offshore in the fall, you have to find the bait fish offshore. Now, one of the challenges with that is that a lot of fish in the fall that are offshore are going to suspend. 95% of the bass, honestly, that you're going to find in these deep clearwater lakes with the steep drop-offs and stuff, they're going to suspend because if we take a look, for example, here at Ants Creek, on Ants Creek, these fish are going to be in the middle of this creek channel and this bait, and what the bait fish will do is they basically start their migration from the main lake out here where they spend their summer, and they're going to move all the way to the backs of these creeks. And what you'll find is that in September, a lot of the bait fish are out here towards the mouth of the creek. In October, your bait fish are going to be kind of in the middle of the creek. In November, they're going to be more towards the back. And then in December, they might be all the way in the back. Now, November and December, you guys can go and run and throw a square bill in the back of the creeks and catch the fish that are feeding on the shad. And that's really fun. But in September and October, a lot of those shad are out here in the middle of these pockets and bays. The issue with that is because they're underneath or in the middle of these pockets and creeks and things like that, a lot of the bait fish is going to be out here suspended over 30 to 90 feet of water. And those bass are going to be out there kind of roaming and chasing them. There's going to be very small feeding windows as a result where you can even catch those fish. Either you need to find them coming up schooling, or you need to figure out when those shad happen to move up on top of a shallower point and those bass happen to start feeding on them. This is why I don't really spend a lot of time fishing offshore in these steep creeks, these really narrow, steep creeks on a clearwater lake. Instead, as I get into the fall time of the year, especially when that water temperature starts dropping in the 70s and in the 60s, I'm going to try to find the flattest possible creek I can find. I still want to find a creek. I don't want to find a like short little pocket or a big bay, open bay like this here, or like a bay like this. The bays for me are not that effective usually offshore. I find that you need to find a creek, but it needs to be a creek that has a lot of flat water. What I mean by that is you need to have a place, like for example in this creek right here, where you have a point where you go from 1 foot to 25 foot of water over like a 100-yard stretch. And you see there's multiple points like this through this area. Now, I was actually out in Table Rock this last weekend and caught a bunch of fish in off all 3 of these points, literally these exact spots, and the water temperature had just dropped 10 degrees from 80 to 70. And what's happening is that these fish, the bait fish, the threadfin shad, were sitting out here all summer long, kind of in this deeper water suspended. And as that water temperature dropped, they're starting to make their way into the creeks. And they're going to be moving towards the back of these creeks into here and into here. Now what's happening is that they need to kind of stop off and feed as they move back in the creeks. And they're going to stop off and feed on any sort of rock and brush out here on these flatter banks. Now, what happens is that these bass, because there's all this flat water here, they're going to be more likely to set up on cover, like rock piles, brush piles, stuff like that, offshore, than they will on a really steep, narrow creek like we have here. Here, the bait fish are going to suspend, and then they might pull up and feed on a dock, or they might feed up on the bank here and then pull back out into the middle of the lake. But when the bait fish want to feed in a creek like this, they don't want to swim over like 100 yards of flat water to get to the bank to feed. Instead, they're just going to stop offshore here and feed. So the key to find fish offshore in the fall on these deep, clear lakes is to find the very, very flat, long, extended points, like these round, long, rounded points in the mouths of these creeks. And this is kind of the key, or just in the creeks in general. And this is the key to finding those offshore fish. Now, what you'll find is on like a Table Rock, 90% of your creeks are going to be very steep, narrow, and with very little flat water. You might find that you might only get 1 out of every 10 creeks that sets up like that. But if we take a look, for example, at like this creek right here, this one right here, you can see as you move back into this creek, you have a lot of flat water sticking off these points here and here and here that extends really far out. This, for example, is a great creek where you have points like this and all of this. These are all prime offshore areas, this long point here, as you get into the fall time of the year, because there's just so much water that sticks way off the bank. And what will happen again is these fish, as you get into September or get into October, they're going to start moving into these creeks, and they're going to set up maybe on these points in October. And then they'll set up on these points in November, and then maybe these points in December. And they're going to be moving their way back into these creeks on these flatter, rounded points. And that's where I catch 90% of my offshore fish in the fall on these deep, clear lakes, are the creeks on very extended, flat, rounded points. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I had a question for you, Jonny, that maybe some of the listeners would have that. How, in your opinion, during the fall like this, on those deep water areas like that, how does the cloud conditions affect the bite on that?
It's really a big factor, because what happens is that as the cloud cover comes in, especially even like early in the morning, these fish have a lot more tendency to roam and school. So they're going to be chasing bait fish, chasing shad out in the middle of these open areas. And what it'll also do is that, let's say that there's a stretch of rock piles, for example, up here in 20 foot of water off the tip of this point, and then there's also rock piles up in 7 foot of water. I'll find that on these offshore points, the fish will be in the 7 foot rock piles and brush piles and stuff when it's cloudy and early in the morning. And then as the day progresses and it gets sunnier and brighter later in the day, they'll move out to like the 12 to 15 to 20 foot rock piles and brush piles. So they'll reposition throughout the day.
So say, for example, you have one of those nasty fall days where the wind's blowing 15 or 20 and it's sort of rainy, cloudy. Do you change techniques on that versus a clear sky, or do you stay with the same techniques?
I do, and what I focus on more is where the bait fish are, because the key to this is if there's no bait fish in the center of this cut right here around these points, there's not going to be any bass there anyways. You need bait fish to be around these areas, and what I'll do is I will graph these areas before I fish, and if I notice that a lot of the bait in this area is down there in that 15 to 20 foot range, I'm going to be looking for cover and structure in 15 to 20 foot. But if I graph over these points when I get there and all the bait is suspended at 7 to 8 foot, I need to start looking for rock piles and brush piles in 7 to 8 foot in the same areas, because those bass are just going to move up and down. They're not really going to be related to something very specific, and they're going to be roaming more. And it makes those fish kind of hard to catch, to be honest. And honestly, you don't catch a lot of big largemouth on these deep, clear lakes doing this. On Table Rock, really, if you're anywhere other than around the Kimberling City area down towards the dam, you can catch a lot of good smallmouth this time of year, October, November, fishing those same areas I talked about all through December on those type of points. But as you get further up the lake and away from where the smallmouth are, you're really dealing with 90% spotted bass doing this pattern. Mm-hmm. You will catch a few largemouth here and there, just kind of mixed in, and some of those largemouth are going to be setting up there. But you're going to catch a lot of spotted bass, a lot of smallmouth, and mixed largemouth. This means that, honestly, for a tournament perspective, your offshore fishing on these deep, clear lakes is probably not going to be the way to go catch big largemouth. Yeah. I wouldn't expect you to be able to win a lot of tournaments offshore on Table Rock from now through December. It's just, there's going to be a lot more big largemouth up shallow on the areas you're talking about, feeding on crawfish, feeding on the perch and the bluegill up shallow. Right. Now, can you catch a really good limit of smallmouth and spotted bass offshore? Yes. It's just, in general, the smallmouth and spotted bass weigh less than the largemouth will, and you're not going to win a tournament that way. Yeah. And that's all it really boils down to for a lot of guys is, how do I go catch them in tournaments? Now, if you're not trying to catch them in tournaments, you can catch 5-1 offshore as up shallow in the fall on these areas. I can literally go catch 50 to 60 fish offshore on Table Rock from October through December offshore very easily with spotted bass and smallmouth, because these fish will group up on these points. You can catch them on swim baits and jigs, swing head jigs, all kinds of stuff, and it's just fun. And I did that the other day when I was on Table Rock. I caught 30 fish in 2 hours offshore. None of them were keepers, though. It was really fun, but they just weren't the right size. But you could go up shallow, and you might get a bite every 45 minutes, but it's going to be a 3 to 4 pounder a lot of times. Does that sound about right to you, Randy?
Yeah, definitely so. And that, I think the gist of that is that, the shallow water fishing in the fall time in the Clearwater lakes, it is so much more weather dependent than the way that you're fishing off the bank. So, the consistency obviously goes with the offshore bite, but if you can capitalize on the right conditions shallow, that's when you can really, do some damage on that. But it's so weather dependent for the bank fishing for the quality fish.
For sure. And I find that with the Clearwater, it's actually harder to catch a big limit of fish offshore in the Clearwater than it is in the dirtier water in other areas of the country. I honestly feel like in the dirtier water, it's easier to catch a big bag of fish offshore in that September, October, November time because the fish do a little bit different stuff.
Right.
Now, there are ways you can catch a really good fish too on these lakes in October and November if you have an Alabama rig. If you can throw an Alabama rig in your tournaments in October and November, and you can find some big largemouth that are suspended on bait in these creeks, there are times when you can't catch a big bag of fish on an A rig, and especially as you get into that December, January, February time, you can crush some big fish offshore on an A rig. But that's a completely different animal than if you're dealing with non-A rig fish. So we can talk about that too in other videos. A couple questions I did get though here. One is, what program am I using here? This is the Navionics web app. You can actually just go type in Navionics web app into Google. It's free to use, and you can just look at any lake across the country. It has every single lake available for you for free. You have to be on a desktop computer. Go to a desktop computer, pull up a Google Chrome browser, Internet Explorer, whatever, Microsoft Edge, and type in Navionics web app. You'll be able to pull it up, and then make sure when you're doing that to go down here, and there's this little, my little Fish at the Moment logo's in the way. 1 second, let me get this out of here. You can see down the bottom, there's this little button. Make sure you click it to Sonar Chart and not Navionics. Navionics is going to give you a lot less detail than the Sonar Chart will, so just make sure you do that. And then another question is, what about on natural lakes with no creeks? Kevin, that was a question from Kevin. This is specifically talking about clear water lakes. They're like kind of highland reservoirs, guys. We are going to be doing videos on the clear water. 1 second here, let me stop presenting. We are going to be doing videos on grass lakes, on rivers, dirty water lakes, and natural lakes. So we're going to be making content about those. So don't worry, we're going to be doing live streams every week here talking about those different types of things, shallow and offshore. The best shallow and offshore areas for dirty water lakes, for the lowland reservoirs, for the river systems, all that stuff. So don't worry, we will be talking about that for sure. Just this time, there's so much to cover, Randy. We can't cover every single style of lake in one stream. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
For sure. So, that was kind of the gist of it for the different types of areas. Do you have any other comments or anything on any of that, Randy, that we talked about?
Well, I think a lot of it on that is, I just can't stress enough how big of a factor the weather plays into the techniques and the approach that you have on the Clearwater lakes. And I think that's one of the things that, if you live on a lake or if you fish a lake that's a clear water, and when I'm talking clear water, I'm talking about water visibility over 4 feet, but 3-4 feet, something like that. You really have to learn as much as you can, and whether it's talking to other anglers, it's YouTubing it, it's getting the information, absorb as much information as you can about how bass react based upon different weather conditions, wind, sky conditions, post-front, pre-front, that type of stuff, because that is absolutely the key to success for me in Clearwater lakes is knowing how to adapt your techniques and the area of the lake that you choose to fish on based upon the weather patterns. And that's why, in order to be a good angler, you sort of have to be like an amateur meteorologist. I mean, I really, really would stress it to people a lot to really learn as much as you can about weather, listen to the Weather Channel a lot, try to incorporate it into your fishing, because when you're talking about clear water fall fishing, that's such an important element, because you can waste so much time if you use the wrong techniques under the wrong conditions in a clear water environment. But for me, most of the time, I'm trying to get some type of a moving bait bite going on, because if you can get a moving bait going on, whether it be crankbait, spinnerbait, glide bait, topwater, something like that, that will generate your bigger strikes than the slow fishing baits like the jigs, worms or whatever like that you can still fish shallow. So I'm looking for those optimum windows, whether it be early in the morning, late in the evening, on those sunny days, or all day long, where I can throw a big moving bait. And that's one of the things I'm really looking for. And another thing is I want to try to fish on the main lake if I can, because there's a lot of fish in the creeks in the fall time of the year on these clear water lakes. But if you can get a main lake shallow bite going on, you're not going to get as many bites, but the quality of your fish is going to go up tremendously. And I'll use it for example, like at Table Rock. If you go into the upper creek or river arm at Table Rock, and say if you get 20 bites during the day, and you go down on the main lake, lower into the lake, and you get 20 bites, I can assure you that the average bite size you get on the main lake will be at least 3 to 4, maybe a half a pound bigger than you will in those upper creek arms. So that's something that another thing to remember this time of year.
For sure, and those main lake fish offshore too, they are existent. I find though that you can't catch as many big fish offshore on the main lake as you can in the creeks, which is actually kind of weird. It's the opposite, where Randy's saying stay on the main lake for the big fish up shallow, and I'm saying go into the creeks for the big fish offshore. So it's kind of flipped. And I think that is a big thing that a lot of guys get messed up. Other thing too, in the fall, definitely focus offshore on the flatter stuff, not the steep stuff. In the summer, you want the steep drop-offs. In the fall, you want very flat, gradual sloping areas. That's another kind of thing to think about. But there's a bunch of people joined on here. We have 350 people. We got like 385 people on the stream. Next time we do the stream, guys, just so you know, I am going to be doing a giveaway with some tackle that Randy and I put together, and we're going to be giving away $100 prize packs of tackle every single time we hit 500 concurrent viewers. So 500 concurrent viewers in the live stream. We hit 385 this time. And what that means is you guys are going to need to be sharing the stream out onto Facebook, with your friends on Instagram, just your brother and sisters, your mom, whoever. Share out the live stream while we're doing it, and then we're going to be picking one person who is watching the stream, and we're going to be giving away that prize pack. So definitely be sharing out the stream if you are, especially if you're here with the chat or if you're just watching. And then we're going to pick one person who's watching the stream every single week to get that $100 prize pack of baits. So definitely be paying attention to that and try to get that stream up to 500. And then if we hit 500 consistently, we might bump it up to 600. We really just want to get as many people watching the stream as possible. Another thing is we are going to be putting this stream onto the Fish the Moment podcast on the Apple iTunes podcast app. I've been slacking on doing that recently, and we're going to be putting those on. I'm also going to be putting on some of my YouTube videos where they're going to be longer form, and Randy's videos as well, where he's talking about baits and stuff. I'm just going to throw a bunch of content onto the podcast, so when you guys are driving to the lake or when you're just sitting around and you want something to listen to, you can listen to the video in podcast form, just the audio of it. I'm not going to put every single video up, obviously, on the podcast because a lot of times you need the visuals to help explain what's going on. But hopefully this live stream here will be good both on audio and with the video. So that's going to be happening. And then one more thing too, just before we close up for the night, is to let you guys know about, let me pull this up here. You guys know about what we're doing on fishthemoment.com again one more time. Just a reminder to sign up for some of our virtual seminars. I got the Advanced Offshore Bass Fishing Seminar where I'm talking about how to really dial in your offshore fishing game to find the best feeding windows, the best rotation on your offshore areas, how to make sure you're not running in the same offshore spots as everyone else in your tournament, how to find hidden offshore areas, all kinds of stuff. And the sign up for that is by October 22nd. It's already half full, so I would go sign up as soon as you can if you're interested in that. It will make you a better and more efficient offshore angler. I can guarantee it. And this is content not covered in other videos that we've done. Randy's going to be doing another advanced jerkbait fishing seminar in November. I'm going to post that here this next week, so be on the lookout for that. And then I'm also going to be doing our advanced bass fishing electronics class. I've talked about that a lot before. So definitely check that out if you want to really improve how to identify fish in your fish finder, know if they're catchable, know which baits to throw, and know if you're wasting your time fishing a spot or not. It's a really good seminar. I've done 3 so far, and everyone's loved it. You can check out people in the comments here or in the live chat. They've probably been... a lot of guys have already taken this so far, and it's... I believe the most valuable seminar that we offer if you're an offshore fisherman. If you want to improve your offshore game, I'm offering this literally every month because it is crucial information for all offshore fishermen. And again, check out the comments in this live chat for guys who have done it. And then all of those seminars, as the great call out by Brent, they will be recorded, and we record every seminar and then send you a full recording. So it's a 3-hour seminar. We're going to record it. We're going to have lots of visuals, graphics, things with like examples of areas to fish, bait recommendations by conditions, all kinds of stuff, and all of that will be recorded and sent to you. So even if you can't catch it even live, you can just sign up and I'll send you the recording of that. So that's really easy there. And also, if you want to get some information on your local lakes, definitely check out our map breakdowns. We have map breakdowns for popular lakes all across the country. Randy produces these. He spends like 4 hours per map picking 60 areas across 4 different sections of these big lakes across the country by season of the year: fall, spring, summer, winter. We also offer a personal map breakdown where you can choose your own lake if your lake doesn't fall within our list of the bigger major lakes across the country. And we only offer 4 of these a week, so if they're sold out when you actually go to purchase one of these, check back. They're restocked every week on Monday, so definitely check back on Monday, next Monday, if these are already sold out. And we can only do 4 a week because, again, it takes Randy 4 hours. If we put unlimited amount on these, Randy, I guarantee you would have to do like 15 a week. You literally would not nonstop just be making map breakdowns. You'd be doing it in the shower.
24/7.
24/7. Like literally, you would never stop doing map breakdowns. That was all you would ever do because there's so many people buying them. So that's good for us though, and we appreciate everyone's support. Really, it's amazing because it really helps out. Obviously, Randy and myself to be able to focus more on fishing and teaching, and we can go out and focus on trying to create the most educational content we can, and we don't have to, like, even Randy doesn't have to worry about when he goes to the opens, like, I gotta cash a check or whatever, which is going to help him do better, and it also allows him to film the process and show you guys how he prepares for tournaments, how he fishes tournaments. And on my end, it allows me to go out and, be able to put gas in the boat and experiment with new offshore lures, experiment with new strategies and techniques, and it's amazing the support that we get, guys. We cannot thank you enough, and we want to keep bringing you as much high quality content as possible. We are really going to double down on that here, focusing on trying to come up with stuff that just isn't on YouTube right now. We've been kind of trying to experiment with comments and thumbnails and titles. You guys have been kind of giving us crap about the clickbait thumbnails and stuff like that. We're just experimenting to see what happens, but at the end of the day, regardless of the thumbnails and titles, we just want to produce the highest quality content for you guys. We put like 8 to 10 hours into every single video just in editing and producing alone, not even the filming. So every video you're looking at takes like probably 20 hours to produce, Randy, all in all.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, absolutely. If you think about that, that is just crazy amount of time per video. But we want to do that because, 1, you guys are supporting us so well, and 2, we want to give back to you guys so you can go catch more fish. So, again, we appreciate all the support, guys. It's always awesome. Anything else to add, Randy?
Yeah, I just second that, Johnny. I just want everybody to know out there how much we do appreciate the support. I mean, like I said, it's the people that follow Fish the Moment. It's like a passionate base of people that really want to learn, because so many people out there, they would rather be entertained than educated. And for so many of y'all that follow Fish the Moment, you're really passionate about learning and becoming the best anglers you can. And that motivates us to want to, put out the best content we can too. And it's a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And we just, like I said, really appreciate, having the avenue to do that. We don't take it for granted. I can tell you that for sure.
No, Randy, you're working around the clock. I'm working around the clock. Like we probably both put in easy 80 hours a week doing Fish the Moment and everything else we're doing to try to put everything together. It's a lot of work, but obviously I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. And so, we love it. And guys, if we're not getting back to all your comments and all your messages and everything like that too, I actually had to add, Randy, I added a message, an automatic reply on my email finally to say I can only get to emails on Mondays and Thursdays, and I still can't get through everyone's emails in a week because we get so many emails, so many Facebook messages, and we try to get through and read every comment and message and everything like that, guys. It's overwhelming, and to be able to produce content, do everything we need to do, and get through the messages is just so hard. So I appreciate everyone's patience on that. As you noticed, guys, I probably, if I've sent you an email, it's been like 2 weeks behind, and that's just because the emails are just crazy, the amount we get and everything, but we try to get back to everyone, even if it's not as quick as we would like to. And again, we just appreciate everyone's support and everyone's enthusiasm for the channel. It's always awesome. So, cool. And Randy, anything else before we wrap up the stream tonight?
No, I think we're good to go. Like I said, we're going to be putting out the tournament videos I did for Sam Rayburn and Lake Hartwell. I've got all that video. Johnny's going to be putting it together, and we're going to make shows on that. I think everybody's going to find it a really interesting learning experience about what to do and what not to do under certain situations. So I'm really excited about filming all the Bass Opens. So that's something that we'll be providing content on here moving forward the next couple months.
For sure. And then Randy and I are going to be doing some team tournaments as well next year. So we're going to be doing some tournaments where I'm going to get out there with him and, trying to do that. And then, while Randy's doing the Bassmaster Opens, I'm going to be doing a lot of offshore content focused on trying to give you guys a lot of the basics and the advanced factors of offshore fishing and really dialing that in for you guys. So that's going to be my focus. And one thing I'm going to be doing, Randy, just to kind of give you a update, is I'm going to be going through all of the Bassmaster tournaments and the FLW tournaments and the Major League Fishing tournaments that I can find over the last 10 years, so 2010 to 2019. And I'm going to figure out all the statistics on how the tournaments were won, how the top 5 were placed in terms of if they caught them offshore or shallow, what baits they caught them on, the time of year, all these factors, type of lake. And I'm going to just produce this giant Excel file of all this data, and then I'm going to use my MBA analytics background to cut all the data, pivot tables, VLOOKUP stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about there. Throwing charts together, and I'm going to come up with as many insights as I can from that, and I'm going to be making a bunch of videos on that. It's probably going to take me 20 to 30 hours to do all the data aggregation and pulling up all the data. But then once I do that, I think it's going to be really cool to show you guys what the trends are over time, maybe how many tournaments are won offshore versus shallow. I don't know what I'll find, but I'm going to spend a week, 1 week, just literally not fishing. I'm just going to be pulling data from Bassmaster websites. So that should be kind of cool.
I can't wait to see that. Those reproducible results like that. That's something that you can't deny the effectiveness of.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm excited about that because I've done stats videos in the past, and I plan on doing more statistical stuff because I love that stuff. Maybe Randy and I can start doing some recording our fish catches and stuff. I have some ideas there too, but if you guys do have ideas on videos that you guys would like us to do that are out of the box, they're not just how to fish a square bill or something like that, feel free to leave a comment on this live stream or any of our videos, because I'm always looking for really cool ideas. And even if you feel like it's a pain in the butt, takes a lot of work, that's the type of videos I love to make. I would prefer to make that than hey, here's the best setup for your square bill crankbaits, because there's 75 videos on that on YouTube right now. There's no one who's going back through all the Bassmaster tournaments ever and looking at the data. So a lot of cool stuff that we're planning on doing. I'm also going to be doing some kayak content, Randy. I did my first kayak trip, and so I'm going to be posting a kayak video this week, so that's going to be fun. So man, there's so much happening, and we're just excited that you guys are here for the ride. And thanks. 336 people are still listening to us ramble here, Randy, so I think that's some pretty loyal fans right now.
One thing I'll leave everybody with tonight is if you get a chance, go back and read my blog on the speedy spinnerbaits on fishthemoment.com, because that, in my opinion, that speedy spinnerbait technique is the #1 fall technique on Clearwater lakes. It's my go-to, and if you read that blog, you'll find out a lot about how to do that, and that's, to me, the most effective way to catch them this time of year.
Yeah, and if you just go to fishmoment.com and go to Fish the Moment blog, it's the Block It blog, Speedy Fall Spinnerbaits. Randy does some really, really good blog posts, just kind of talking through some stuff, so definitely check those out. And then again, there's a lot of other content. We're trying to put more content out on the Fish the Moment website. We're trying to put as much out of everything we can. So be on the lookout. Just check on fishmoment.com every once in a while. We're going to be doing some advertisements and stuff for that. I'm going to be doing some funny advertisements here too, Randy, because everyone's kind of, I feel like they're getting bored of my like 1 minute monologue of like, here's how you sign up for a thing. So I'm literally about to get a green screen and we're about to make some funny advertisements. So be on the lookout for those two, guys. Like I'm about to get very creative with some advertisements. I see some funny ones on some sports talk shows and stuff that I watch. If you guys watch Pat McAfee Sports Talk, I don't know if any of you guys do that. He does some very funny mid-roll ads. So we're gonna be doing some of that stuff too. I don't know, I've got this like new burst of like creativity that came through recently, and I am all about a lot of new stuff. So I'm excited about that for you guys.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. Well, anyways, hopefully you guys are enjoying the streams. Again, this is gonna be available on the Fish the Moment podcast, as well as a lot of other content. I'll be uploading old podcast or old live streams as well onto the podcast here soon. So I'm just going to try to dump as many of those on there as I can, probably starting next week, so that you guys can just have a ton of those to go back and listen to as you drive to the lake. And other than that, thanks for joining us for live stream. Next week, we're going to be doing same time, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we're going to be looking at the best fall areas on dirty water lakes. So definitely don't miss that. Should be really good deal. And other than that, thanks for checking out the stream, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.